Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client-therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de-identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Today, we are doing a flashback to episode 7, where we walked through understanding the child's world through play. I hope you enjoy revisiting this important topic, or maybe getting the chance to listen for the first time. Enjoy. Today's episode is particularly special for me, and in recognizing our incredible Play Therapy Circle community, I want to invite in those that aren't just play therapists, but all of our listeners who might be parents, caregivers, people working in the education space, in the childcare space, community services space, anyone who has the privilege and the honor of working with kids. This episode is also for you, because I want to talk today about understanding the child's world through play. And I always say when I am sharing training with others who are learning to be CCPT practitioners, that I always say you will never look at play the same way after you have learnt CCPT. And I stand by that. I think that it offers an incredible insight into what children are trying to communicate without using words. So this is really powerful and an incredible skill that we develop as CCPT practitioners. And as Gary Landreth always says, we shouldn't be holding those skills just within the playroom. We should be sharing it with everyone in our community. And so I share this with you in living that tenet and that commitment to CCPT by doing this podcast. So hopefully I will reach and be able to share this with more people as part of my work as a CCPT practitioner. So today we're going to dive into how play gives us a window into children's worlds and particularly their inner world, and how we use CCPT to understand what they're trying to tell us without any communication via words. So this is definitely, as I said, a skill that we learn, but we also really hold true to the idea that children will tell us in their way, in their time, and it's more about understanding what that is for us to then be able to respond rather than trying to fix it. So I want to plant that seed for all of you listening at home that we live in our framework of person-centered counseling and approach, where we espouse to that self-actualization principle that if given the right space, kids will thrive and they will move towards that self-actualization goal. However, if they don't necessarily have that space where they're seen and heard, that we have this opportunity to shift that and to better understand what they're trying to tell us so that we can help to support them into more of those pro-social behaviors. So we live by this principle. So I want to share it all with you now and hopefully give you some insight. So hopefully today's podcast will also plant the seed for the children that you're currently working with or connected with. So this could even be your own child or children within your community. This goes for everyone. I always say, now that I do this and obviously have been for the last 10 years, that I will go to children's birthday parties, and you just can't unsee it. Like, as soon as you understand what children are communicating through play, you see it everywhere, in the shopping centre, in the parks, at play dates, whatever that looks like. You will be able to have this sense of, okay, this is what this child might be trying to communicate without words. And so it's an incredible honour to be able to do this work. What I want to start off by saying, and I want to do a whole podcast on just the state of children's mental health in current times, because I think there is so many factors that go into the presentation of kids that we currently see in our practices and in our clinics. But universally, I think what is so important to remind us all is that play is children's universal language. So despite what they are going through, despite where they live, despite the communities they are a part of, they will all use play in those formative years to understand and make sense of their world and to communicate to others. So they use play to express themselves, to express their thoughts and their feelings and their experiences. And they always do. So when I connect with parents, what I often say is, I am going to see, obviously, play in the playroom. That's part of my job. But you will also see a version of the play that I see in some capacity at home. It'll be maybe a slightly different way, but they will still be trying to work through the same issue or problem at home, just with different resources or in a different space. So I'm always encouraging parents and caregivers to just sit back and observe, not for the purposes of information gathering, that's not the intention, but more around helping to see and hear their child without intervening and without fixing. I think in our current communities, and I can talk to my local community, is that I think that we have parents who are really struggling themselves, and that is absolutely understandable for many reasons. But as a result, I think we have certainly tried to shift as a collective in our parenting towards more of the gentle parenting style, to supporting our child to be seen and heard. But as a result, I think a lot of parenting styles have shifted towards helping to fix things for their kids because they want to make sure that they're happy. They want to make sure that their child feels connected with them, that they feel safe and nurtured and loved. And I think all of those are incredibly beautiful and important qualities to have as a parent. But I think conversely, when we dive in quickly, or too quickly sometimes, to fix things for kids, we miss the messaging behind what they're trying to tell us. So for any of you listening out there, I am a parent myself, so I feel like I can share that we are certainly always critiquing ourselves as mums. In particular, I know we can always be super critical of ourselves and put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be a great parent. I think that if we can take a little bit of that pressure off and sit in that position of believing in the potential and the capacity of our own kids, and for sometimes them to sit in that struggle, to help them to work through and support them regardless, will go a long way to helping our kids. So we come from this perspective as CCPT practitioners that play is how children communicate. I always say behavior is communication. So we're going to talk soon about what that looks like in terms of different settings, in particular the clinic and play therapy settings. But I really want to emphasize that point first because it's super important that we hold that in mind. If we then look from that, it's important for us as the adults in the child's life to take the opportunity to understand what they're trying to tell us through play, rather than asking questions, rather than intervening, rather than trying to fix or find solutions for kids. Can we stop and just be with the child to hear what they're trying to tell us? That's a really hard thing to do. So I just want to plant that seed as well. I'm planting so many seeds today, you guys. So for many children, especially younger kids, play is their communication. So we often say that play therapy for kids is like what talk-based therapy is for adults. That's kind of how we try sometimes to phrase it to parents and caregivers and stakeholders to understand what play therapy is all about. So if we need to go to a therapist ourselves as an adult and use that talk-based approach, maybe that's CBT or another modality, children also need to do this, but they don't necessarily preference words, they preference play. That's how they communicate, talk through, and make sense of the things that are happening to them. So in CCPT, in child-centered play therapy, how do we understand what play is all about? So certainly as a practitioner myself, I hold that space and belief that the child is capable of working through those issues that they're experiencing and developing that self-understanding and that growth. That can be really hard as a parent in particular, as an educator, if we work in that space of being required to offer teachings and learnings to kids, that we actually kind of flip that idea on its head to say that children actually know what they need to work through, they know what they need to talk about, and they know what needs fixing. They just don't have the words to be able to express that. So they'll do that through their behavior and through their play. I very often have parents that come over the last 10 years to my clinic who will talk about certain traumas that have been experienced in their family background and emphasize the point that the child was not in the room or wasn't aware, and so they don't know what happened. And very quickly in the playroom, through play, not through words, but through play, they will play out those trauma experiences very vividly. And I will then go back to the parents and say, I think they know more than you anticipate. So I think that when we come from that perspective, I always say kids are so smart. That is like my big catchphrase that I say, that they are so much smarter than we give them credit for. So if that is the case, and if they actually hold a lot of information that neurobiologically they haven't quite been able to put context or understanding to, how are they going to do that if they can't use words to express themselves? They're going to use play. So what is our role as the therapist? It's definitely to create that sense of safety and trust and connection and acceptance. All of those tenets that we've talked about in our beginning podcast episodes that are very much a part of CCPT practice. So that congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard. So what we often lean into is this idea that through play, the child tells their story in symbolic ways. So this happens on so many different ways and so many different levels, and I've got so many examples that come to mind. So we'll talk that through in a second. But what I want to, again, emphasize here is that if we shift our understanding or our perspective that some behaviors, and especially those that say are aggressive, aren't necessarily kids trying to be naughty or bad, but in fact they're trying to express or communicate urgently something that is happening within their inner world that they need to make sense of or they need help with. It helps us to flip that idea of what the play is all about. So I definitely want you guys to be thinking about in the observations of the play, if you are working in a clinical practice as a CCPT practitioner, not to immediately go to that lens of symptomology or understanding, I guess, that superficial level of that behavior presentation. Say a child that's resisting to go into the therapy room and we're seeing an escalation in that transition into the playroom. Not seeing that necessarily as them digging their heels in and being stubborn, but potentially there being something underneath, an unmet need, a heightened emotion, a particular issue for them that they are in fact struggling with. So if we look at it from that lens, for a child that is struggling to, say, transition into a playroom and separate from mum or dad, it may actually be that they are deeply concerned, especially if there's been a trauma background, they're deeply concerned about the well-being of their parent that's in the waiting room, and they actually don't want to separate, because if they do, they don't have eyes on their parent and they're not sure what will happen if they're not around. So that takes a very different lens to that behavior if we're looking at what is the child trying to communicate and being resistant to separate from that parent. And there's lots and lots of different reasons, guys. I'm just giving one. It is absolutely going to be child dependent in terms of their history, presenting issues, diagnoses, goals of therapy. There's so many elements, guys. I'm just kind of trying to keep this as basic as I can to try and reach as many people as I can in this space. So definitely taking a minute to look at the behavior, but then what might be underneath that behavior, what might be the unmet need or the issue or problem or situation or feeling that the child is trying to communicate to us, sometimes very urgently. So what do we see emerging in play when we start to understand the child's world? And I do want to give you obviously different perspectives in terms of holistically my clients, not one client in particular, and certainly not anything in relation to direct therapy work or client work I've done. But I want to talk holistically across the 10 years, what I have seen in terms of those different types of play. So we can see this in many different ways. What I say when I am supporting beginning play therapists, especially when they begin to connect with a family or a child, and in the beginning sessions, they observe the child to use, say, shop, the role play of shop. So very generally topic here. So what we understand in our approach, especially in those beginning sessions, in that exploratory stage, is this idea that children want to understand the nature of the relationship with us. They want to know that we are somebody safe, trusting, that can hold space for them, to be able to provide that sense of empathy and acceptance that maybe they haven't had in experiences with other adults in their life. So we really work hard to build that relationship. And we talked a couple of episodes ago about the importance of the relationship between the therapist and the child. So that is super, super important. But what that means is that children will sometimes use play to assess that, to understand that. And what I always say is children don't come in with an agenda in play therapy. They don't sit in the car on the way when they're being driven to the clinic and say, right, I'm going to tick this theme, and maybe I'll throw in this one as well. They don't come in with a cognitive, conscious awareness of what they're going to do. But what is incredible about this work is, generally speaking, most kids do the same thing. So when they are exploring and understanding that trust and safety, we see some fairly consistent role plays that emerge. And one of them is shop. So we could look at shop superficially and say, okay, this child really enjoys playing shop with me. This is something that they quite like to do, and they knew how to do it. That could be at a very superficial level how we could look at that play. What I want to encourage beginning play therapists to consider is this idea of it not necessarily just being about shop, but what the child is trying to do is engage in a relational experience where there is back and forth and transactions involved. When we start to dig a little deeper and looking at that play, what children are doing is essentially, from an attachment theory perspective, starting to understand that back and forth experience of a relationship with another. There is this experience of buying something, say we're the therapist and we're the shop person, we're buying stuff at the shop, and the client is the shopkeeper. There's this interaction where we are buying things and giving it to the child. The child might scan those items. They might ring it up on the cash register. They might ask us for money. We hand the money over. They might give us some change. There is a back and forth, to and fro between ourselves and the child, where they're using in real time through play to establish, are we somebody that's going to respond to them? Are we going to meet them where they're at? And are we going to engage with them in a way that's reciprocal, respectful, connected, all of those beautiful qualities of CCPT? So there's often this need, if they have had anxious attachments outside of play therapy, where they may need to do this repeatedly until they feel that sense of safety and trust. So it might be one role play of shop, it might be 10 role plays of shop. Again, children don't come with an agenda and a timeline, which is really hard when we're trying to explain that to stakeholders, right? But this is the incredible thing about children is they know how much time they need. So shop and that role play of shop is a really kind of basic example of how that works, where children are not just playing with a cash register, but there is a deeper unpacking and understanding of a relationship with another. That's one example. I've got so many, guys, so I'm going to try and do another one. So one of those things that we see when kids progress in their therapy work, so this is more maybe halfway through therapy or 3/4 of the way through therapy, but it can be at any stage, is this role play around hide and seek. For any of you play therapists out there listening at home who have seen a child engage in hide and seek, if we were to just look at that superficially, at the surface level of that play, we might say that they have played hide and seek before, that they know how that goes and they like it and it's something they want to do with us. Again, that's awesome, and that is certainly part of that observation. But as a CCPT practitioner, we take that a little bit deeper. So what we do is to understand what is going on when we are doing that hide and seek role play. There's so many different variables to this, and we will talk about this in later podcasts. But the idea of them engaging in this role play again, where they are hiding and they're getting us to find them, certainly relates oftentimes to this unpacking and exploration again of that attachment relationship between ourselves and the child. But more importantly, their experiences again outside of play therapy and making sense of what it feels like to be constantly found. So there's this idea of again, that experience of attachment relationships with others where people might go away and come back, go away and come back. We understand from attachment theory that certainly goes into establishing that secure attachment base when children are in those formative years. If they haven't experienced that in their lives, they may need to play that out over and over and over until again, neurobiologically, they understand, oh, the therapist is somebody who's not going to leave and never come back. So again, I'm planting this seed, guys, and I'm really, really simplifying this because there's so much I could talk about in terms of hide and seek, which I won't because I have to be on a time frame here, you guys, to make it easy for you guys to digest this information. So what I want to, again, plant the seed. If you are seeing children in your life right now who are engaging in hide and seek, it might be worth taking a second to just observe that play, engage in it. Obviously, we want to play with the child, but observe it rather than treating it, I guess, at that superficial level. Because very often in the playroom, there is other parts to that play that they are trying to unpack and make sense of. We have so many different elements in the playroom where this looks and arises. We obviously have sand tray, and there's often sand tray work that children do that is very symbolic, that help children to unpack their experiences and how they're doing. I've had many, many different sand trays over the years in my playroom where oftentimes kids will use resources to talk about their experience again with others or just their understanding of their world. And so helping us to symbolically understand can be really useful. Art is another one where we certainly see that expression of that inner world. And so again, we hold very firmly in CCPT that art, any kind of drawings, is very much an insight into that child's world. So we don't do things like hang them up on the wall. We certainly don't put them on display because we recognize that there is so much therapeutic content that is contained within those drawings that it's so important to us that we protect that from a confidentiality and ethical perspective. So it's certainly something that is used in the playroom. And so again, sometimes art can be very symbolic around the things that are going on for that child in their life. I've given you guys a couple of examples of how that looks in the playroom. I have so many more, but what I guess I want to say is that as part of my work, what I've learnt over time is the importance of having patience. of really stopping myself from jumping in to ask questions or to understand what the child is trying to tell me. And that really comes from that perspective of adults being the experts, right? That we need to essentially understand what the child's doing to either teach something to them or fix something for them, or jump in and help solve something for them that they are struggling with themselves. I often say to therapists that becomes so much about our stuff and not about the child's. Because here's the great thing about kids is that regardless of whether we understand what they're trying to tell us, they'll keep telling it until we get it. So whether we can jump in first time that we see a play and help them to understand it and show our own understanding or not is not important. At the end of the day, the child will certainly keep playing something out until they've found resolution to it themselves too, or they feel like they've had that healing and growth so that they can move on. So we see that in the playroom, but we certainly see that in other settings as well, more broadly in the education and the childcare space, where we often see really big behaviors. And I think that there is so many aspects to supporting kids in those larger settings that I would love to do a podcast all about that, guys. So I promise that topic will come because I want to see and validate and hear those incredible childcare and education workers in our broader community. So I certainly think that that becomes really challenging when children are using their play, their behavior and their play to communicate things that are going on for them when we don't necessarily have that immediate time to hold space to help them feel seen and heard. So I think that anywhere in a child's life, they're going to be using behaviors in a way that talks to what's happening for them and what they're struggling with and what they're experiencing. And it is about us as adults, rather than jumping in and asking questions, taking a minute to stop and observe. And more importantly, to validate feelings. I always say that with anyone I connect with. I really want to encourage anyone connected with children, if we're able to validate and see and hear children's feelings, that is absolutely 100% the first step in helping healing and growth and change. So I can't encourage that enough. Whoever is listening right now, in worst case scenario, in times of stress, we revert back to what we know. If you can, in those moments where you're struggling, to stop, to breathe, to take a minute to observe, and maybe just go to the feelings to help validate what's going on for that child in the first instance. It may or may not work, but I share that with you as a passionate CCPT practitioner in this space. I think that valuing too, when we're talking about CCPT and its application to the wider community, is this valuing of unconditional positive regard. Whew, that is hard when we have a child who is presenting with really high intensity behaviors, for example. It's really, really tricky, and it's difficult for us as adults in that space. But we don't tell the child what it means. We support them to work through it. It's so important that we give them that space to process what's going on for them. And even in those alternative spaces, not just in the clinics and in private practice, but if we can hold just a minute of space for a child to be able to feel seen and heard and support them to work through it, it will go a long way in supporting them to feel like they can move towards that self-actualization principle. So we accept the child, though, in terms of that particular value, no matter what they express. So that can be really tricky when we're working in a play therapy space. So to all of my incredible play therapists in our play therapy circle community, and I feel like this needs to be on a t-shirt, you guys, for our CCPT guys out there, trust the process. Trust the process. I know, right? I feel like every supervisee I have, I say that to them and they're like, I know. I know, I'm doing it. What's going on? That's what I say to you again. Trust the process. So what can we do both as play therapists and those in the community to help support kids, and for those of you listening at home. So I want to encourage parents, teachers, caregivers, agency workers, all of those incredible people doing incredible things in that work of supporting children in our community, to try to observe without rushing to interpret. Whew. Observe without rushing to interpret. Or I'd like to add to that, observe without rushing to fix or to question. Right? So what can we do to create that? So creating safe play spaces where kids can just use the resources to play as opposed to having a prescribed structure, allowing those freedom in play choices. And like I was just saying, reflecting those feelings is so, so important. You're feeling really, really frustrated right now and it's really hard. Those kind of things, those kind of statements really help support kids. We use that CCPT lens in our practice to understanding how we can grow from presence, not control. Ooh. Big, big stuff, you guys. Hey, I want to wrap this episode out because we're at 30 minutes. Guys, in the beginning, it was short and sweet. I fear as we go through these episodes, they're going to get longer. I'm going to try and keep to my time, you guys, but I hope for all of you listening at home that this has started to plant the seed, as I have throughout this session, around listening through play to the child's inner world. So what do we understand as a recap of all of this? Play is children's natural mode of communication. As Gary Lynch would say, toys are their words and play is their language. So CCPT and the skills of CCPT provides that environment for understanding. And so through play, we can get an understanding or insight into the child's inner world with respect and acceptance. So what I want to invite you all to reflect on as I wrap up this episode is to think about the last time you observed a child's play, to think about what might they have been telling you. Whew. Not what you saw them do, not looking at that superficial level, but what might be the function or the message or the unmet need or the emotions or the experience behind the play. What's under the surface? What are they trying to tell you? And I encourage each of you to do this in your work, in your daily connection with kids, to hear children's stories. So, thank you so much for listening today. I appreciate wholeheartedly every single member of our Play Therapy Circle community. Please feel free to share with your colleagues, friends, parents, others this podcast to help spread the word about CCPT, how amazing it is and how it can support the children in your community. Please follow us along on Instagram at the Play Therapy Circle podcast, and please feel free to share our podcast posts as we update every week. Every week we drop an episode on Friday. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have a topic that you would like us to cover in the future. But thank you so much for being here and being part of the circle. So thank you so much, everyone. Go, and I will connect with you again soon. Thanks. Bye. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.